Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Please subscribe to our channel on Apple Podcasts, Immigrantly Uninterrupted. You can subscribe for as little as $34.99 for the entire year or $3.99 a month. And yes, you will get ad-free episodes. But honestly, this isn't really about skipping ads. It's about supporting independent media and conversations that don't always have a neat little box to live in. The kind of conversations where we talk about life, identity, culture, dating, relationships, all the messy, but real stuff. So think of it like this. If you've ever listened to an episode of Lovely while you're on a walk, you're in the car, or maybe even after a bad date thinking, okay, wow, I really needed to hear that. This is how you help keep those conversations going. So if Lovely has ever made you feel seen, challenged your thinking, or expanded the narrative around all those things, subscribing is one way you can support the show. If you enjoy the conversations we're having, subscribe to Immigrantly Uninterrupted and help us keep building this on our terms. And once you do, send me a message on Instagram. I'd love to know. Hello, and welcome back to Lovely. This is your host, Mahek, and happy Friday. Okay, we have a very exciting episode for you today, but business as usual, let's give you a quick little life update. If you were listening to last week's episode with Ali Zhang, it was a little bit more of like a story time episode. It was very cute. It was very funny. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, go give it a listen after this one. But I was telling Ali how I had been seeing this guy for about like 3 to 4 weeks and everything was good, good on paper, but something wasn't there. Like there was misalignment in terms of lifestyles, and there was also a certain spark that was missing from my end. But I decided to give it, a few more dates to really make my decision, so I'm not, again, writing someone off too quickly. And during that episode, I was like, okay, I'm going to go on another date and I will sort it out. And I think that would have been like our 5th date. Before going on the date, though, I felt very anxious and my gut was telling me, you kind of have your answer. You're not feeling what you need to be feeling, and giving it one more date isn't going to solve the bigger issue, which is you guys are incompatible. So I sent him a message and was like, listen, I just want to be really open and upfront with you. As much as I've enjoyed getting to know you, I just don't think we're compatible. And I think there's misalignment. So it wouldn't be fair to go on the date and pretend to like have a good time or think that there's a future when there isn't. And he respected that and responded amicably. And yeah, so we both are not seeing each other anymore. So that's that. So today's episode, we're talking about something that every single person in the modern dating world seems to have an opinion on, which is standards. And if you spend 5 minutes online, you'll see people saying things like women's standards are too high, men don't want to provide anymore, dating apps have ruined everything, or that everyone is chasing a fantasy. But the question I keep coming back to is actually a different one. And that is, are people single because their standards are too high or because they don't actually understand what they're looking for? And today's guest has a really unique viewpoint on this. The guest that I have on today, she goes by Baji. And I think what she's doing is different from the traditional version people imagine, right? I think historically, matchmakers were almost like mediators. Like they were people who helped you compromise, smooth things over, and get married. But she does things a little bit differently, and she has a lot of content on social media, which when you see the videos, you'll understand exactly what I'm saying. You know, she's very direct with people about their expectations, their profiles, their blind spots.
Dominance. I'm a confident and assertive man who is seeking marriage. I have great leadership skills. I manage high level teams and work well under pressure. I'm looking for someone who can complement a man who naturally leads, is assertive and dominant.
And I really wanted to have her on to unpack this and also chat about all things right and wrong with modern dating. So like I said, I have Baji on today's episode, and I'm really, really excited to have her. I also was just told that it is her first podcast that she is ever doing. So, you know, we'll get the juicy hot tea on everything that she's kind of seen over the years. And with that, Baji, welcome to Lovely. How are you?
Great. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, you celebrating Ramadan. Do you have like a favorite tradition that you like to do during Ramadan?
I'd love to go to the mosque, just at least even if it's like once a week or something like that. Try to go for Jummah. I try to go for like the community iftars. It's just like nice to see other people also celebrating and kind of like that Ramadan spirit. Like sometimes it can feel a little bit lonely in the US. I just like the community aspect of it. We try to also get together with like our local community so that, you know, my kids, their friends, you know, even like Muslims, non-Muslims, we just invite everybody and everybody can kind of, I don't know, like celebrate what we celebrate.
3 days of food, celebration, nice outfits. I love it. Okay, so let's kind of get into a little bit about you. What is your connection to immigrant identity? And also, like, would love to hear your views growing up about love.
I am a first generation Pakistani American. My parents are immigrants. So culture is really important to me. Religion is important to me. Language is important to me. Like these are all things that I grew up with and I really value. And so I hold these values close and dear. I mean, obviously English is my first language. Like I grew up here, so I definitely have Western ideals, but there's a part of it that where, you know, it can be tricky a lot of the times, but like weaving it in with culture and religion, but meanwhile also leaving behind the toxic cultural norms that we used to have.
Absolutely. So, you know, in terms of you developing these views and kind of bringing it to your business and the clients that you meet with, what it's sounding like is your purpose is to help them see dating from a different perspective, because I know you're doing matchmaking and you're doing it for Muslims, so people within the community. So you're almost bringing a different angle that like you guys can still be compatible and be with one another, and not have this toxic mindset that everything needs to be saddled for the woman and the guy just kind of like gets to enjoy all the benefits, right? And I know I've introduced you as Baji. And for those of you that don't know what Baji means, Baji in Urdu means sister. And I'm really curious to kind of know, where did that name come from? And also if you can tell us a little bit more about your matchmaking service.
Sure. So I was, you know, kind of started making some TikTok videos and it got some traction on certain topics in terms of relationships and things like that. And, you know, I just saw people around me who were kind of going through this process with dating apps and things like that. And, you know, I was just seeing like a lot of like the similar pain points. And so I wanted to just kind of talk about it from like person who has like no skin in the game. I'm, you know, not on the market, kind of just like very removed from this process. So, but, you know, being removed from it, I can tell certain things, I guess. And so I started getting a lot of traction that way. And then I started getting a lot of like messages and DMs asking me for advice. And I even started connecting people in the background. And so what I just decided to do one day was I was like, you know what, just kind of to help my community, I'm going to put out this matchmaking resource. And I just kind of think that there's like a human aspect that's missing to this. And I put it out and that's kind of how it started.
I love that being an outsider actually allowed you to provide better advice, which kind of makes sense because you're not really coming from that biasness of, oh, you should be doing it this way or that way because that's what you're seeing people already doing it. And obviously, it's not bringing them luck. Can you give a very like realistic example of a pain point that you were noticing and kind of what advice did you give that was different from what was already being said?
One thing that's kind of been a theme in a lot of the videos that I do is that people have, their set of requirements that they have. And what ends up happening is that they kind of look at the set of requirements as like a wish list rather than something that they need to also be introspective about and self-aware about on their own. So, rather than kind of look for, hey, listen, what is the absolute best that I can get? And let me just rattle all of those things off. It's really about kind of being self-aware and seeing, well, what am I bringing to the table as well? And this partner also has to choose me. And so I think people actually forget that.
Yeah. And I think what you're really describing is the entitlement that we see in dating these days, right? Like everyone is looking for nice to haves when you need to differentiate between must haves and nice to have. And then also being realistic with like, are you able to provide those nice to haves? Because it's really not realistic for you not to have majority of those things, but you're demanding it from the other person. I have so many questions because I do know you mentioned that it's a free service. Can you run me through the process? Like, how does it work from end to end?
I have a pretty detailed form. You'll go and you fill it out. I do require photos. There are people who tell me, can I not share photos? And no, sorry. I need photos. And I know people can be like, especially some certain Muslim people can be a little bit private. And so I would say in that case, my service is not for you. And I do require people share, things, information about themselves, their description, whatever. And also I require people who are serious. And so very initially, if I see that someone says, oh, they're just looking, they're rejected. If I see that someone hasn't, given a proper description or puts like 3 words or a line in the description for themselves or what they're looking for a partner, you're rejected. If you cannot take the time and you can't take the effort to explain to another person who is doing this for you for free, and give them direction and information about yourself or about what you're looking for, and you're going to treat this like a dating app, like a throwaway option, I'm going to throw your profile away as well.
I think you're very realistic in terms of what your criteria is. Like you want to make sure that the client can clearly state who they are and what they're looking for, and then be able to back that up, right? With the credentials or pictures that they're sending in. And then in return, you can be realistic with them based on everything, all the information that you've provided, which is part of your brand. That I'm not here to sugarcoat things, which kind of goes to my next point, and it's actually one of the most frequently asked questions in your comment section. So I'm very curious to hear your answer or take on it. Is you talk a lot about the idea of people needing to be realistic about who they're compatible with, but like, how do you determine what quote unquote average even means in your matchmaking process, right? Because you're like, anytime I've seen you review a profile, you're like, oh, in my opinion, average looking, in my opinion, above
Sweet
average
email
looking.
exchange. Male, 31, engineer, above average looking in my opinion, and he's tall and fit. He makes
On
several
what scale do
references
you
to
determine that?
leadership and dominance.
It's really funny. Like people ask me that, and I responded a couple of times in the comments, being like, "So people are like, how do you determine, who's above average looking, who's average, and all that?" And I say, I use my eyes. And I know that's kind of like a cheeky response, but I have to start somewhere. So that's where I start. And I'm not saying that like me, I'm like the end all be all of whether someone's attractive or not, because a bunch of people have said, well, who the hell are you, right? To like call someone attractive or unattractive, whatever. And what I say to that is everyone has opinions. I start off there. I start off with what, in my opinion, I find attractive or average or whatever it might be. And then when I have a profile of someone where, I can kind of assess where they're at and then, find someone kind of based on their requirements and also based on kind of what I think, like gives a match for them in terms of attractiveness, in terms of kind of like vibe and, all of those things. It's not going to be an exact 1-to-1, but I'm going to try and do that. And then I give both people a chance to respond. And so they'll tell me, hey, you know what? I'm not interested. And to that, I'll always ask, like, they have to give me an answer. Why are you not interested? And sometimes they'll respond, they'll say, I'm not attracted. And so I'll respond with, no, I need you to tell me what exactly is not attractive about this person, because I have no sense of what someone else might also find attractive, what they don't find attractive. It might be something very specific. It might be something, something else. And so I try to really get down into what specifically it is.
I have some follow-up questions. Is it more men or women who reject matches due to attractiveness?
I would say that it is slightly more men who will reject based on attractiveness, slightly more men.
Are you noticing that these days, like it's getting more and more shallow? Like, is there too much emphasis on attraction? Like, it's also interesting when someone is aesthetically attractive, like conventionally on paper, off paper, anyone will look at them and they'll be like, you're attractive. But sometimes there's also attraction that comes from charisma, personality, things like that. So, do you think the emphasis on attraction is more these days just on like the physical elements? And that's why you ask them to really describe it, because then you can give them that feedback. Well, I've actually met this person in person and they're more attractive in person. Like, you know what I mean?
So, I don't know what things were like before or how shallow people were like before. So I can't really compare it to anything. But I will say that there is a huge emphasis on looks right now. Sometimes people will tell me that, they're okay with someone who's, average looking or fine looking, whatever, but then they'll reject every single person that I send them. Or it'll be someone who says, hey, my ideal height for, a man is 5'11". And then I send them someone who's 5'9", and then they'll reject them just because of the height. So meanwhile, they're like 5'4". So, some of these things.
Wait, I want to ask about that. Okay. So if they've told you they want 5'11",
Mhm.
why would you send them 5'9"?
So they say their ideal height is 5'11", or they say
Okay.
ideally, like something like that, right? But also, if you're 5'4", this gets into the territory for me where I just think that, if you're this particular about someone where you need someone who is 7 inches taller than you, and you're not willing to compromise even on 2 inches, I don't know if this is the right thing for you. And I don't know if I'm the right person for you, because, honestly, are you going to be wearing 5-inch heels? Are you going to be wearing 7-inch heels? Like I understand people might have these requirements, but it almost just kind of goes into like the maturity of the process, right? If you're not mature enough to kind of look past that, this person meets every single other one of my requirements, and they're not easy requirements to meet sometimes, right? But you would rather reject them on the basis of like 2 inches off, where they're still quite a bit taller than you. It just tells me that you're not mature enough to, I don't know, just be in this process. Or that you're too particular for me to want to go through this process with you. I mean, like, go find your 5'11". I'm happy for you, but for me, like, I don't know. Like, I just kind of feel like that would be a little bit too rigid for me.
Okay, I have a different take on it. And I think what I will say on that is I agree. If you've said ideal height, but you're like, I'm flexible, then that's a different scenario, right? But I think when it comes to height specifically, and you were saying, well, if you're 5'4" and you want someone that's 6 feet, why do you want someone that's 7 or 8 inches like taller than you? And I don't necessarily agree with it not being like mature in the process. I think, I'm 5'3", like I said, but I do tend to like gravitate towards men who are taller, right? And for me, it's simply a physical dynamic I'm naturally drawn to. And again, everyone has certain preferences when it comes to attraction. That is just one of mine. And it's not meant as a judgment. Now, I will say, like, if I'm like, oh, my ideal height is 6 feet, or it's like 6'2", but everything else is checking off and there's certain qualities that can outweigh the height, yeah, I'd be open to, dating someone that's a little bit like shorter than my ideal height. I also think that people should be allowed to like what they want, as long as they're being like realistic in some of the other aspects. Like if I was here sitting like, oh, I need like a 6'4" man, and he needs to be making like 300K, and he needs to be a Vogue model, and he needs to like be a provider, and he needs to treat me with kindness, respect. Like again, like I understand like the unrealistic standards, but height has always been and will be like a physical dynamic people look for. And then in return, if someone says, "Oh, you're not like my ideal weight," I'm okay with that too. You know what I mean? So I guess I'm being realistic.
I think thing is this, right? Is that I don't think that anyone who has a height requirement or a height preference is immature. That's definitely not what I mean. What I mean is these are people who have a lot of other requirements. So they have a lot of religious requirements. They have relocation requirements. They have, obviously what they expect in terms of other things for like, their partner, in terms of career and looks and whatever it is as well. So now you're layering all of these other things on top of it, right? And so if height was the one or two things that you had like really adamant about, I get it, right? But if you're also layering it over all of these other things, and it just shows me that you're not flexible at all, it just means that this is just like not the process for you. And that's the other thing, right? The other thing is that you're not getting your nikah tomorrow. Okay. You're not getting married tomorrow. You are talking to this person. You are having a conversation. If you're not even willing to have a conversation with this person because he is 2 inches off of your ideal height and meets every other requirement, that is the part of the maturity thing that I guess I'm talking about.
That's fair. That's fair.
I think a big issue about why there's like a Muslim marriage crisis, I mean, just general crisis and, a crisis in general where people kind of are not necessarily like getting together or dating or marrying, is that people don't have to get married nowadays. Like people are pretty self-sufficient. It's like women before maybe couldn't have been as educated as because like they had limitations. Nowadays, women are educated. They don't need to get married. They're making their own money. Men can kind of figure things out on their own as well. I heard of a man who, he had 5 kids via surrogate because he wanted kids. He didn't find the person that he wanted to get married with. And then, like he could afford it.
I think, yeah, as the times are evolving, what it looks like for someone to date or be in a marriage is also evolving. You're right. Women are more self-sufficient. They're more financially independent. They don't have to put up with things that they don't want to. But I also think that's where kind of like the entitlement comes from when you're looking at probably men's profile is they have this endless amount of wish lists that they're not being realistic about because they think someone's just going to choose them because that's kind of historically been the case, right? Like women were kind of like forced to choose.
Don't chew on that, Max.
Cooper loves that chew too.
Oh, now he's into Cooper's food. Wow, he is loving it. What do you feed Cooper?
Blue Buffalo Life Protection Formula. He never leaves a crumb. I love it because it's made with high-quality protein, nutrient-rich fruits and veggies, and wholesome whole grains.
Looks like we're switching to Blue.
Blue Buffalo foods are made with the superior ingredients your dog needs to thrive. Can your dog food say that? Visit feedbluefood.com to learn more.
So kind of like moving on to the next thing that I want to talk about is growing up. I've always heard that men need to be like the sole providers and, women are doing some of the other responsibilities. But I've also heard in Islam, it's like, men's money is like both of the monies and then women's money is her own money. So what is your take on men being sole providers in a relationship?
I guess just from an Islamic perspective, right? Men are supposed to be providers in the sense that they are supposed to provide basic living expenses and things like that for their wife and their family. And their wife is not obliged to contribute financially to their household. So in terms of that, right, like I think that there's a lot of expectation from women because this is an Islamic requirement that this is something that's going to be provided. Not all women, but a lot of them. And so there is basis in our religion for it. And for me, that makes it something that's adequate to ask for. So for certain men, they're fine to provide, like some of them are happy to provide. So someone will say, you know what, I don't really need my wife to work. I don't need her to contribute to the household. They're fine with that. But sometimes where like it gets a little bit hairy for them is that they're like, well, but I still want a woman who is like engaged and who's like, dynamic. And I guess they want a partner who has kind of like ambition as well.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to understand is what friction point are you seeing when it comes to these conversations? Because the way I've seen it play out is, and again, I'm not trying to say like men are saying this, women are saying this, but just a recent example that's coming to mind is the friction point that a lot of men are saying that I want a woman that can do it all. Like she needs to have a career, she needs to be goal oriented, but she also needs to be obedient and be traditional.
Well, what's funny? There's no friction point in terms of my matchmaking pool. My matchmaking pool, I think a lot of men are like, hey, listen, I don't really care if she works. She can work. Sometimes, I don't really care. There's a friction point in my comment section when I talk about these things because there are people who obviously disagree. There are some men who say, I want someone who's going to equally contribute to the household, right? And that's fine. That they can want that. I just want to say that like it almost adds to their marketability. I had done kind of like an email exchange with someone where he was a physician and he expected his partner to contribute to the household. He didn't want a wife who didn't work. Like he wants someone who wants to contribute to the household. And so I was like, listen, that's fine. You can want that. And I had actually shared a few matches with him and he got rejected by both of them. I'm like, you're not doing well, right? Like based on kind of like what you want, they don't want you back, right? So maybe it's time to reevaluate where you're standing, right? Maybe you reevaluate the provider thing. Maybe if that's too important for you, then reevaluate the looks, reevaluate the education. Something's not right because the people that you want don't want you back. It's about marketability. If you're finding that things aren't aligning, being a provider makes you more marketable. It just does. Whether someone takes you up on it or not, it opens up your pool. Sometimes there's a little bit of with women who sometimes say, I don't want to work, but I also kind of want full support at home. But that's not going to be something that someone necessarily wants to hear. And those women don't do well either. Like a man hears that and they're like, oh, that sounds greedy. And that sounds inflexible and that sounds unsustainable. And that just sounds like you just want me to be a workhorse or whatever it might be. And I agree with that too.
Yeah, again, I think people need to stop treating like getting a partner as their lottery ticket to a better life. Like you need to create a better life for yourself and then find someone that complements like I just think finding a partner should be like finding your best friend that you can share similar experiences with, right? But speaking of this, I know we've talked a lot about men and their standards and everything. Something that we hear all the time, or I hear it sometimes, not all the time, sometimes, from people that are a little bit more traditional and from people that are a little bit more older. I'm 33, I'm single. I have been on the apps, I haven't been on the apps, but I like to think that I am selective when it comes to, pursuing something long term with someone. And some of the older people have told me, well, I think your standards are a little too high, you're a little too picky. Like maybe you need to not be so picky. From what you've seen working with clients, that maybe if you can draw some similarities to just the way I've come across today or what I look like or how my life is, do you think like people are genuinely rejecting good partners or the pool is just not that great right now and you're choosing to still be selective by honoring your standards?
So I guess just to answer like what the pool looks like, I was actually pleasantly surprised by what the pool looks like. So, where a lot of people were like, man, the dating apps suck. There's like, oh, it's all trash. There's trash people on there, something like that. So I was like, God, what happened to all the good ones? And I'm like, there are a lot of good ones. There are. Sometimes when I come across like a woman's profile and, I'll just tell her that like, something what she wants sounds unrealistic or I reject her or something like that. People will sometimes tell me that, I'm trying to lower her standards. And I'm like, I don't actually know what that means. I'm not trying to lower anyone's standards. I'm just trying to tell you what I see in terms of feedback.
Well, yeah, and again, I think matchmakers and matchmaking is having a big comeback right now because not right now, but it has been for the past few years and more people are leaning towards it because I think dating apps, don't just give people more options, they give people the illusion that someone is better like just a swipe away. right? And I think it could be dangerous because it makes people treat connection like a marketplace instead of a relationship. So again, at the same time, I also don't want to romanticize the past either, because historically people have had very limited pools, and sometimes end up in marriages simply because those were the only options available. And matchmaking kind of does the best of both worlds. You're providing more options with also the realistic nature, because there's a human the human is the middle person, right? Not just the app. So you're saying, hey, I've seen you swipe left on 10 people. Why? So you're almost like challenging people to think about that why, which I think then can lead to better outcomes.
I'm not here to change anybody, right? So I think I wanted to be very clear about, I'm trying to help kind of connect people, and I'm not trying to get anyone to change their standards or, stop wanting what they want. If someone really wants something, I say go for it. Look for it. You can do it. I just don't want to do it for you. And then in terms of if someone has a certain thought process of something, they want an obedient wife, or a woman who wants a provider, but also wants their husband to work 50-50 at home. You can want what you want, and that's fine. What I'm going to tell you is that, in my pool, or in all the experience that I've had in doing this is going to be very difficult for you to find. And I can give you that data point based on data that I have and my opinion. And so, you can tell me, hey, find me this kind of person. I'll be like, sorry, I'm not going to be able to, because this is just not maybe it exists. I'm sure it exists, but what you're looking for is a needle in the haystack. And so I'm not going to help you look for it. And then I reject them. So that's kind of like what it is that they finally get maybe some kind of feedback on what their requests and requirements are, rather than whereas before they may not be getting this kind of feedback. If they're on a dating app, they might never even see if someone else rejects them, because they might have rejected that person as well. But I think this is actually good information to have. Are you even your type's type? That's kind of, I think that's a perspective that I provide that is helpful and useful. So like I said, I don't really care if I don't really care to make anyone agree with me. You are welcome to have your thoughts. But at the end of the day, how many other women or how many other men share these thoughts with you? Because, you can kind of say that you have these thought processes and things like that. But if you're kind of sitting there in a vacuum by yourself, or with two other guys, or two other, you can kind of see where your pool lies. I've had plenty of people who, after having that back and forth with me, they're reevaluate everything. And then they kind of come back with me kind of hey, listen, I really had kind of a thought about this, and I kind of want to pivot. And, I think that it can be helpful for them sometimes. And it could just be a form of kind of, I don't know, introspection. So I would just say this, that people who are self-aware will kind of make anything work. They'll end up probably figuring things out through dating apps. They'll end up figuring things out in real life. They'll probably figure things out, in whatever way. This is just another avenue that they can try.
I kind of want to pivot and wrap up our conversation today. I think you've made a lot of good points, and probably everyone listening, it will encourage them to be a little bit more self-aware as to, is it proportionate to what you're asking to versus what you want to receive? But kind of going into my next thing, we had Allie on our podcast last episode, and she's left a question for you, which is, if you were to parent you as a child, what would you have done differently from your parents?
My parents brought us up to be very humble. So I think Islamically, they wanted us to align with that. I guess Desi parents or Pakistani parents, South Asian parents, they weren't very complimentary, or they weren't very, and I think I get some of my bluntness from my mom, because my mom is very blunt. She's always kind of been you put on weight, or, and I think this is kind of very typical for South Asian cultures and families and, things like that, the way that they talk to each other. For me, I almost had to kind of discover the positive things about myself. Like, I think we should have like a realistic sense of where we kind of stand in terms of certain things, like the things that we need to be working on, but also the things that are positive about us, because, then we might not have to discover that with like the first attention that we're getting and not be surprised at the attention that we're getting. You kind of know your worth.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
I feel like that's something that I would do probably differently from the way that my parents did, is that, I understand how humbleness is important, but I almost kind of like I thought I was a troll until I was like 18 or, like some like ridiculously older age where like I just had no idea. So it kind of like had to come into a little bit of my confidence. I think my parents had a certain aim and, I understand where that was, but at some point, I think it's important for, and I don't think that that's not necessarily a problem these days for a lot of parents and families. I think it's a different dynamic now.
Yeah, I'm picking up exactly what you're putting down. I think growing up, a lot of the emphasis and compliments were very focused towards exterior. And that's all you start to think about and remember. So when it comes to actually things that build your confidence and help you kind of navigate life better, that's, I think, what you're saying should have been done a little bit more with the balancing act of humbleness and humility. But I think building confidence from a younger age it really helps you determine that sense of self. Trust me, I get what you're saying. So on the flip side, Baji, what question would you like to leave for my next guest?
Knowing what you know now about yourself, and, maturing the way that you have, how do you think that might have changed your relationship dynamics earlier on in previous relationships that you've had?
I like that one. I'm curious to hear what people will say, and this can go either way, right? So I think, do you ask this to your clients or have asked in some capacity?
So, I don't have time to get into the philosophical portions of it. It's very interesting. I think it can go either way. Like, I think people are like, oh, I know so much more about what I want. Like, that was like a really toxic situation for me. And, I would have recognized and clocked it immediately. And some people are kind of like, yeah, I might have been more mature. Like, I was really like not mature then. And I would have treated this differently. I would have done that differently. So like, I think it can go either way.
Totally. Thank you so much for coming on the episode today. And if someone wants to find you on socials, what is your social?
Yeah, I mean, it's Level Up 1% on Instagram and TikTok.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, well, what a lovely conversation, as always, with Baji, and reflecting back on the discussion that we had. I think what today's conversation really comes down to is, what it means to be realistic in dating. And I do think self-awareness matters. You have to be honest about what you're asking for and also what you bring to the table. We also talked about some of the bigger expectations that still exist in dating, like the idea that men should always be the providers and how those roles are changing as relationships evolve. And the one thing that really stuck with me from this conversation is the tension between being practical and being honest about attraction. I understand the logic of saying, why rule someone out over something like height if they have every other quality you want? But personally, my take is that attraction isn't a math equation. If someone is asking for kindness, humor, ambition, qualities they also bring themselves, then a physical preference doesn't automatically make them shallow. Sometimes it's just a part of dynamic they're naturally drawn to. So I think at the end of the day, the real question isn't whether people have preferences, because everyone does. The question is whether you're self-aware enough to understand why those preferences matter to you, and whether you're also bringing the same level of thoughtfulness to what you offer in a relationship. So if there's one takeaway from this conversation, it's that dating isn't really about optimizing for the perfect checklist. It's about understanding yourself, being honest about what you're drawn to, and finding someone whose values and energy actually align with yours. And like always, we will see you next week on Friday for more Lovely. Lovely is an Emma Grantley media production. This episode was produced by Sadia Khan and Shay Yu, written by me, Mahek. Theme music, sound design, and editing by Lou Raskin. Other music is by Epidemic Sound. See you next week for more Lovely.